They're rallying behind the star of the hit cable TV show, Phil Robertson. As CNN's Anderson Cooper shows us, it's what he said off camera that's got him in some hot water and suspended.
A secret daughter, a hidden past, and a final battle with Alzheimer's. Phil Robertson left behind far more than fame and fortune when he died on May 25, 2025, at 79. The man who turned a simple duck call into a multi-million-dollar empire and the hit show Duck Dynasty built a legacy millions admired. But behind the beard and the success were revelations few fans expected. What truth about his past shocked even his own family? And what happened in the final months that made those closest to him break down? Join us as we reveal the full story. The boy who was never supposed to be famous. Phil Robertson did not grow up with any intention of becoming a television personality, a best-selling author, or a cultural figure whose face would eventually be recognized in every state in the country. He was born in Vivian, Louisiana, the fifth of 7 children born to James and Merritt Robertson in the kind of rural Louisiana poverty that does not, as a rule, produce television stars. The swamp was his classroom. The woods behind whatever house the family was living in were his entertainment. He learned to hunt before he learned most other things that adults consider useful, and the skills he developed in those Louisiana woods turned out to be worth considerably more than anyone in Vivian would have predicted. Robertson attended Louisiana Tech University, where he played football as a quarterback. That detail gets overlooked in the Duck Dynasty narrative, because the bearded, camouflage-wearing man who dominated a decade of American reality television does not immediately read as a college quarterback. But he was one, and a good one. He earned a master's degree in education and taught for several years before founding Duck Commander. The man who would become famous for saying things that made network executives nervous had a graduate degree and a teaching career before he ever built his first duck call. The years between graduation and the founding of Duck Commander were the ones nobody on the television show talked about directly. But the 2023 film The Blind addressed head-on. Phil Robertson was not a gentle, faith-filled patriarch during his 20s. He was a man with a drinking problem, a violent temper, and a lifestyle that was destroying his marriage and his family at the same time. Phil and Miss Kay experienced a genuinely rocky period in their marriage during the early 1970s, largely due to Phil's drinking and lifestyle choices that put serious strain on their relationship and the family they were trying to build. Kay Robertson has described being thrown out of the house by Phil during this period, taking the children and leaving, not knowing whether the marriage would survive. What changed everything was a religious conversion at the age of 28. After giving his life to Jesus at 28, Phil turned his attention back to the woods, building a life around the things he loved most: hunting, family, and the Lord. That conversion was not a gentle drift toward faith. By all accounts from those who knew him before and after, it was a complete and total transformation that happened quickly and endured for the remaining 51 years of his life. The man who had been throwing his wife out of the house became the man who called his wife his greatest earthly blessing, and said so publicly, repeatedly, for 5 decades. In 1972, Phil invented a double-reeded duck call and soon founded his company, Duck Commander. The invention came from a specific frustration. He was an exceptional duck hunter who was dissatisfied with every commercial duck call on the market. None of them produced the exact sound he needed, so he made one that did in his workshop by hand, through trial and error, and the particular obsessive attention to craft that characterizes genuinely talented people who care more about getting something right than about being recognized for getting it right. He received a patent for the call and incorporated Duck Commander in 1973. For the next 3 decades, he sold duck calls out of the back of his truck. He made hunting videos called The Duck Men of Louisiana that developed a cult following in the hunting world. He built a profitable, sustainable, and entirely his own business. And he had no particular interest in anything beyond that world until a production company knocked on the door and asked if he would let cameras follow his family around for a television show. But if the origin story of Phil Robertson, the man, was more complicated than the Duck Dynasty version suggested, what did the fortune that the television show built actually look like when the cameras finally stopped rolling? The Duck Call that became a $13 million empire. Duck Commander is a multi-million-dollar business today, headed by his son, Willie Robertson. The company Phil Robertson started in his workshop in 1973 with a homemade double-reeded duck call, and a patent grew into a business with multiple product lines, a national retail presence, and the kind of brand recognition that only comes from being at the center of one of the most successful reality television franchises in American history. Phil Robertson's net worth at the time of his death is estimated at approximately $13.5 million, a figure that accounts for his income from Duck Commander, his participation in Duck Dynasty across 11 seasons, book royalties, speaking fees, and the value of real estate in West Monroe, Louisiana. That number needs to be understood in the context of what the people around him were worth, because the Robertson family fortune as a whole is considerably larger than Phil Robertson's individual estate. Willie Robertson, Phil's son and the CEO of Duck Commander, has a net worth of $45 million. Corey Robertson, Willie's wife and business partner, has a net worth of $40 million. Miss Kay Robertson, Phil's wife of 60 years, has a net worth of $15 million. The family that Phil Robertson built from a converted swamp shack in Louisiana is collectively worth well over $100 million. The patriarch who started the whole thing is the least wealthy person in the immediate family by a significant margin, which is consistent with the way Phil Robertson operated his entire life. He was not the businessman, he was the original. Willie took the original and turned it into an empire, and Phil watched it happen from the woods with what everyone who knew him described as genuine pleasure, with no apparent resentment about who got the credit. Though Robertson is not known for living lavishly, he owns valuable real estate in West Monroe, Louisiana, where the family's sprawling compound includes homes, production facilities, and hunting land. These assets, while not publicly listed, are believed to add considerable value to his overall net worth, particularly given rising land values and the property's brand association. The compound is not a celebrity mansion. It is a working piece of Louisiana land that has been in continuous active use for hunting, filming, and family life since the Robertson family built their life around it. The monetary value of that land is real and significant. The sentimental value of it to the children and grandchildren who grew up running through those woods is considerably harder to put a number on. Duck Commander remains a key pillar of Robertson's fortune, symbolizing how a simple handmade product driven by conviction rather than corporate polish can become a cornerstone of generational wealth. There is something worth noting about the specific origin of the Robertson family's money. It did not come from venture capital, inheritance, or the kind of financial infrastructure that produces most American fortunes of this size. It came from a man who was good at hunting, dissatisfied with the tools available to him, and stubborn enough to make better ones himself. The simplicity of that origin is part of why the Duck Dynasty audience was so large and so loyal. The Robertsons looked like people who had earned what they had, because they had. Phil's first foray into the world of entertainment was through the creation of duck hunting videos titled The Duckmen of Louisiana. This eventually led to his role on the successful television series Duck Dynasty, followed by the Unashamed podcast and the movie about his life story, The Blind. Each of those platforms generated revenue streams that accumulated across decades and that the estate now holds in some form. The book royalties alone from Phil's multiple published works, including Happy, 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 and Unfiltered, represent ongoing income that will continue generating returns for the estate well beyond his death. And if the fortune was built on a foundation of genuine Louisiana craftsmanship and an unlikely television career, the most complicated piece of the estate story is not the money. It is the daughter who did not exist in any public record until 2020, and who is now a part of everything Phil Robertson left behind. The daughter nobody knew about. In March 2020, Phil Robertson sat down with his 4 sons on their Unashamed podcast and told a story that none of his millions of followers had any reason to expect. Phil's son, Alan, explained that he had received a letter from a woman named Phyllis who claimed to be their sister. She had found the Robertson family through a DNA search and was reaching out to determine if Phil was her biological father. Alan's initial reaction was skepticism. The woman's birthday appeared to fall after the period when Phil had become a Christian in the early 1970s, and Alan could not immediately reconcile the timeline with what he knew about his father's life. Upon learning she was not looking for money and that she was also a Christian, Alan decided it was time to tell his parents. Phil agreed to take a DNA test. The results came back positive. Phyllis Thomas was Phil Robertson's biological daughter. The affair that produced her had happened in the early 1970s, during the darkest period of Phil Robertson's life, the years before the religious conversion that transformed him. The timing placed the conception in precisely the window when Phil was drinking heavily and making decisions that the man he became would spend the rest of his life acknowledging and trying to make right. The family embraced Phyllis. Jep Robertson said, "It was super awesome. I was so excited. It was like a dream come true." That reaction from a grown man who had just discovered he had a secret half-sister is not the reaction most people would predict. It reflects something specific about the Robertson family's faith-based approach to the complications that real human lives produce. The past was the past. Phyllis was here now. She was family. End of discussion. Phil took Phyllis duck hunting. He taught her to make mayhaw jelly. She celebrated her first Father's Day with him in 2021, posting, "Dad taught me how to make crawfish au gratin. Delicious and memorable Father's Day. The first one I've ever spent with him." Phyllis rang in Christmas 2021 with Phil and Miss Kay alongside the rest of the Robertson family. The speed with which a secret became a family tradition is one of the more genuinely remarkable details in the Robertson story. Within 1 year of learning she existed, Phyllis Thomas was making holiday recipes with her biological father in Louisiana and going duck hunting with brothers she had not known she had. In 2025, following Phil's death, Phyllis took to social media to pay tribute, posting, "These are just a small glimpse of the countless moments we hold dear. We're truly moved by the overwhelming love and prayers shared by so many whose lives were impacted by Dad." The word Dad in that tribute, posted publicly by a woman who spent decades not knowing who her biological father was, is the most humanizing single detail in the entire estate story. Not the $13.5 million net worth. Not the Duck Commander Company. Not the 11 seasons of Duck Dynasty. The word Dad, used by a woman who finally got 5 years to mean it before the man it referred to was gone. But if the revelation of Phyllis was a complication that the Robertson family absorbed with grace, the final chapter of Phil Robertson's life was the one that nobody in the family had the tools to fix, or the faith to fully accept without grief. The Alzheimer's diagnosis, the final months, and the last thumbs up. In December 2024, Phil Robertson's son, Jace Robertson, revealed on the Unashamed podcast that his father had been diagnosed with Alzheimer's disease in the early stages. Jace explained that the Alzheimer's diagnosis stemmed from ongoing health struggles, including a blood disorder that had been accelerating and causing problems throughout Phil's entire body. The announcement came 5 months before Phil Robertson died, which means the family spent those 5 months watching a man who had built his entire identity around memory, storytelling, and the specific accumulated knowledge of a lifetime of hunting and faith lose his ability to access the things he had spent 79 years building up. Jace described the situation with the bluntness the Robertson family has always brought to difficult truths. He's just not doing well. He's really struggling. He keeps saying, "I'm gonna get back to the podcast." But I'm like, well, Phil, you can barely walk around without crying out in pain, and your memory is not what it once was. He's like, tell me about it. That exchange, Phil Robertson acknowledging with characteristic directness that his own memory was gone, is devastating in a way that a clinical description of Alzheimer's disease never quite captures. The man was aware enough to understand what he was losing. He just could no longer hold on to it. Despite the Robertson patriarch's prognosis, Phil was not letting it hold him back. He kept saying he was going to get back to the podcast, a determination that everyone around him found both admirable and heartbreaking, given the physical and cognitive reality of what was happening to him. That determination, the insistence on returning to the work, on getting back to the conversations and the preaching and the storytelling that had defined his life since the day he first sat down in front of a microphone, is the most accurate portrait available of who Phil Robertson was as a person. Not the controversy, not the GQ interview, not the suspension from A&E that lasted 9 days before fan pressure reversed it. The man who was in serious pain, who could barely walk, who could not hold a conversation, and who kept telling his son he was going to get back to the podcast. Phil died in May at the age of 79, 5 months after sharing his Alzheimer's disease diagnosis. During the filming of Duck Dynasty, The Revival, Phil gave Willie his blessing for the new show in what turned out to be one of his final appearances on camera. Corey Robertson described the moment. The timing was a little surreal. Our show came out the week Phil passed. It was really special to our family to have that one little clip. We did film that one little thing where he gave Willie the thumbs up. A thumbs up. That was the last thing Phil Robertson gave his son Willie on camera, in the final days of a life that had produced 11 seasons of one of the most watched reality shows in American television history. A company worth tens of millions of dollars, a podcast with millions of listeners, and a family whose combined fortune exceeds $100 million. A thumbs up. Go ahead. Keep going. This is what we built, and it is good, and I am proud of it. The family announced his death on May 25, 2025, in a statement that read, "We celebrate today that our father, husband, and grandfather, Phil Robertson, is now with the Lord." The word celebrate is the one that most people outside the Robertson family's faith tradition find unexpected in an announcement of death. Inside that tradition, it is the most theologically precise word available. The man had been saying for years that death was not the end of anything but the beginning of something better. Saying celebrate was not a denial or a performance. It was the specific vocabulary of a family that had taken their patriarch's beliefs seriously enough to use them honestly when they were hardest to use. The private family service in which all of Phil's children spoke eulogies was recorded, and the video was released to the public via YouTube on June 7, 2025. The decision to record the private service and release it publicly reflects the Robertson family's specific relationship with its audience. They had been inviting cameras into their lives since 2012, letting the people who had watched and prayed and written letters across 13 years share in the most private moment of the family's grief was consistent with everything Duck Dynasty had ever been about. His obituary, written by his family, described his life as a story of hard work, redemption, deep faith, and unshakable family values. They described him to the world as Phil, Dad, Papa Phil, and the rock of our family. And they noted that he never missed a moment to share the great hope that he had for life beyond the grave through the death, burial, and resurrection of Jesus. That is a specific kind of fortune that does not appear in any estate valuation. Do you think the Robertson family carries Phil Robertson's legacy forward in a way that honors what he actually was rather than the television version of it? Share your thoughts with us in the comment section. Remember to like, share, and subscribe for more. Also, click the next video showing on your screen. You will enjoy it.